Greetings. My name is Kerry McLean, and I'm a member of the steering committee that organized the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence against People of African Descent in the United States. Welcome to all of you who joined us from different parts of the world for today's press conference. Racist police violence has been a scourge in the United States since the end of slavery. Black people in the United States and our allies have long engaged in struggle to survive and eradicate that violence. In June 2020, following the brutal murder of George Floyd, which has since been witnessed by the world on video, an international coalition of hundreds of organizations and individuals sent a communication to the United Nations Human Rights Council urging that the UN convene a commission of inquiry to investigate racism and racist police violence in the United States. In an unprecedented move, the African group followed up on that request, requesting an urgent debate on racism at the UN Human Rights Council, and also calling for a commission of inquiry to investigate racism. We learned from our contacts that the US pressured some countries to oppose a commission of inquiry. The Human Rights Council declined the request to convene a commission of inquiry, though it did task the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights with preparing a report on racism. Following the UN's decision to not convene a commission of inquiry, the National Conference of Black Lawyers, the National Lawyers Guild, and the International Association of Democratic Lawyers decided to convene a commission of inquiry to conduct the thorough and impartial investigation of police violence in the US that the community had demanded. The Commission of Inquiry's mandate was to investigate the systemic, widespread, and grave violations of the rights of Black people by police in the United States and present its findings and recommendations in a report. We assembled a team of 12 experts, commissioners, none of whom are from the United States, to conduct the investigations in an independent and impartial manner. Our commissioners hail from Jamaica, Antigua and Barbuda, Pakistan, South Africa, Japan, India, Nigeria, France, Costa Rica, and the United Kingdom. We conducted live hearings of 44 cases where the commissioners heard testimony from the family members of victims of police violence, testimony from lawyers who represent the families of victims, and testimony from community activists. The commissioners also reviewed reports, legislation, and other relevant materials. The Commission of Inquiry conducted a thorough investigation into anti-Black violence perpetrated by police in the United States, both historically and in recent times, with an emphasis on evaluating the most recent cases and addressing the connection of the current cases to the history of systemic racism. We concluded our live hearings of cases in February, and our commissioners worked alongside a team of rapporteurs to prepare a report. The report has been shared with the UN High Commissioner and shared with the public at a press conference in the United States. You might have seen news articles about our report in the Guardian newspaper and Newsweek. We hope that our report will be utilized widely and, most importantly, serve as a resource to the community. Today, we present our report to an audience in Kenya and other parts of East Africa. Two of our commissioners will present selected findings and recommendations from the report. We ask for your solidarity and support in advancing the report and seeking implementation of its recommendations. We have several speakers, so let's move forward. I'm honored to introduce Willy Mutunga, former Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court of Kenya. Justice Mutunga has been working with us to share our report across Africa.
Thank you, Kerry. These are my remarks. We stand in solidarity with the Floyd family. We also stand in solidarity with the other 43 families. And this report must continue to give voice to all the families in their struggles to get justice for their loved ones. I glorify the brilliant work of the commissioners, the rapporteurs, the steering committee for the timely completion of this report, and I wholeheartedly endorse this report. Indeed, this report follows on the footsteps of others in the past. Of special interest is the Russell Tribunal, also called the International War Crimes Tribunal, This tribunal investigated and evaluated American foreign policy and its war against the Vietnamese people. And there have been others, 1774 to 76 tribunals on the repression in Brazil, Chile, and Latin America. 2000, the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal, which is called the Torture Tribunal. And I had great honor of serving as a judge in that tribunal that dealt with the inhumanity of the Japanese military against women in Korea, Taiwan, China, Indonesia, Okinawa, and East Timor. In 2001, there was a tribunal on human rights in psychiatry, 2004 on Iraq, 2007 to 2012 on Iran, and 2009 to 2014 on Palestine. In June this year, yet another independent tribunal starts its hearings to investigate whether the Chinese government's alleged rights abuses against the Uyghurs, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that properly, the Uyghurs amount to genocide or crimes against humanity. Collectively, these people's initiatives, are about international justice and people-to-people solidarities around the globe to end gross injustices. The National Conference of Black Lawyers wrote to the High Commissioner for Human Rights on 20th March 2021 in one of the paragraphs. This is what the letter says. The International Commission of Inquiry was empaneled in response to the voices of the families throughout the United States who came together in the wake of the killing of George Floyd to ask the Human Rights Council to focus on this important issue. That request resulted in the commissioner's mandate to undertake global investigation of systemic racist police violence. We believe our report, this particular report, provides the needed information and analysis about the United States to assist in the commissioner's investigation. The executive summary of the report has summary findings and recommendations. Now, for us in Africa, we must focus on our people, our governments, and the AU. Kenya is a member of the UN Security Council this year. A decision by a bench of 5 judges of the High Court of Kenya has delivered a great decision on the sovereignty of the Kenyan people and our 2010 Constitution. All sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya. The Kenya government enjoys only delegated power by the Kenyan people. We have the networks to mobilize the Kenyan people in this matter to ensure that our government does not subvert our will to stand in solidarity with our sisters and brothers in the US. It's our voice that we want heard in the UN Security Council, the UN High Commission for Human Rights, and the AU. We look forward to the solidarities of the Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, and West African people as this struggle continues. Our resurrected radical Pan-Africanism is about people-to-people solidarities with our sisters and brothers in the African world. We are going to internationalize challenges of systemic racism. I call upon our social movements, our human rights and social justice movements, the media, the youth of Kenya to own this report, put it in our current trajectory of national, regional, and global solidarities. Going forward, this is the only way our struggles will also receive global solidarity. Finally, we should all demand a new planet, that is free, peaceful, safe, non-militaristic, non-racist, non-ethnic, gender just, ecologically safe, egalitarian, and prosperous. That should be the global people's struggle in this century. And this report is a great entry point to the struggle for such a new planet, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, Willy, for those comments. And also just thank you for your support in rolling out this report across Africa. Our next speaker is Lennox Hinds, who is the coordinator of the Commission of Inquiry.
Let me unmute myself. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank and extend our condolences on behalf of the steering committee to the families of victims who had to relive the pain and horrors of the senseless, unjustified, and illegal executions of their loved ones at the hands of the police during the hearings. The same police officers here in the United States who are sworn under the law to serve and protect, and instead served as executioners of our children, our loved ones, and the victims in all instances were unarmed or posing no threat or serious bodily harm to the police or any third person. In the words of one of the family members who testified, the only weapon these individuals had were the color of their skin. We also would like to thank and extend our appreciation to our 12 commissioners who are all international experts from Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean, two of whom we have here today with us, Hina Jilani of Pakistan and Peter Herbert of the United Kingdom. We like to thank them for taking time from their busy schedules to review witness statements, to preside over the hearings, and to hear the heart-wrenching testimonies of the witnesses, and to prepare this report, which you will be hearing findings and recommendations from today. We also would like to thank our 4 rapporteurs, one of whom we have here today, Professor Horace Campbell, who took the time from their busy professional schedules to help coordinate the testimony of the witnesses, introduce the witnesses at the hearings to the commissioners, and assisted the commissioners in preparing the report. We also like to thank our outreach team, who went through thousands of cases dating back over the last 60 to 75 years, and who selected 44 of the most egregious cases for our hearings. These cases represented only the tip of the iceberg of the systemic nature of the pandemic of racist police violence against Black people here in the United States. The cases were selected from states, 20 states and 33 cities across the United States, from the West Coast, the East Coast, Midwest, and the South. The cities were large and the cities were small. We heard testimony of the variety of weapons and methods that the police use in the malicious and intentional killings of unarmed Black men, Black women, trans and gender non-conforming Black people across the United States. The victims were shot. They were tortured with tasers, inflicting 50,000 volts of electricity into the bodies of people suffering from mental health illnesses. Some victims were suffocated, others were choked to death. And the police used all variety of methods to kill these individuals, including using their vehicles as legal weapons. In all cases, the victims were unarmed. I would be amiss if I did not thank my fellow members of the steering committee who have spent the last 11 months preparing this report. The genesis of this International Commission of Inquiry was inspired by the petition of Paul Robeson and William Patterson, who in 1951 filed a petition at the United Nations in which was entitled Recharge Genocide in the Crimes of the United States Government Against the Negro People. The immediate predecessor of this commission that we are hearing findings and recommendations from today flowed from the 1978 petition filed by the National Conference of Black Lawyers, the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, and the United Church of Christ. This was filed with the United Nations Human Rights Commission on Human Rights Day in 1978. In support of that petition, the International Association of Democratic Lawyers in 1979 fielded a delegation of international lawyers from Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean. She had traveled throughout the United States, heard testimony from prisoners all around the United States, and issued their report. Today, the findings and recommendations contained in this report that you will be hearing today was filed with the Office of the High Commissioner in March of this year and will be, we hope, will be incorporated in her recommendations to the United Nations Human Rights Council towards the end of June. This rollout in East Africa is part of a overall rollout on the continent to mobilize and generate solidarity of the people, peace-loving people of Africa in solidarity with our brothers and sisters here in the United States. And this is under the coordination of Dr. Willy Mutunga. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lennox. Okay, our next speaker, I'm honored to present Mr. Philonise Floyd, whose brother, George Floyd, was brutally murdered by the police. Philonise?
Hello, hi y'all. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry about it. It's fine. Just go ahead.
All right. As you all know, I'm Philonise Floyd, brother George Floyd. My brother George Floyd was 46 years of age when he was murdered by Minneapolis police officers. It was a horrific murder. He was tortured to death for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, like a motion cinema picture. The world watched him being killed, and kids had to watch him while he was being tortured to death as he screamed. And at all times he was saying, please, please, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, stop. Now his children are left without a father. Not only did they kill my brother, but now I have to watch, and the world had to watch him die over and over, millions of times, just in the courtroom. Not only that, people watched him on videos. People watched him from YouTube. Anywhere that you went, you seen George Floyd being tortured to death in a world what we live in a country that we live in that's supposed to be the land of the free. Throughout this video, he told police officers that he could not breathe at least 12 times. Not only did they kill my brother, but having to watch these videos have taken a toll on me. And not only me, my family, and this world, because every mother who heard him say, scream out, mama, they all felt that pain. And I'm just his brother, and I hear that from everybody throughout America when they all talk to me. I'm here today to let you all know that I have to be the big brother now. I have to not only show the world that their kids shouldn't have to live in fear. My brother kids are facing the same situation, because when I look at Gianna, I think of my mother, and she's just a child. I don't want her to have to experience another George Floyd. I don't want her to have to experience another Breonna Taylor, another Ahmaud Arbery. There's so many deaths here in the US, it's hard to even just explain why, you know. Basically, this is why I'm seeking justice for people, not just here in America, but all over the world, for me, who have been needlessly killed in the justice system, not for Black America, one system for Black America, and not one just for white America. We all should be joined together to stand in solidarity with each other. And right now, just being on the call with you all, I know it's a lot of people going through a lot of different things. I've been on the phone with a lot of people from Brazil. Brazil, they always telling me different things, that I don't believe that your skin should be a weapon of mass destruction. And that's the way that African-American people are viewed. And I have a lot of problems with that, because we are some of the smartest people in the world. People of color, period, are. It shouldn't be about the Asian race. It shouldn't be talking about the Black race. It shouldn't be talking about the white race. There's only one race, and it's the human race. And if we all don't come together, we will all be taken out by COVID, because COVID, to me, is placing and it's hindering people right now, and people are dying every day. You pull up to your table and you pull the chair, and you have an empty chair there because somebody passed away from your family due to COVID. But everything is about racism at this time in America, surely. One thing I can tell you is I am Philonise Floyd, and it doesn't matter what happens, this system, it will never break my faith. And I will stand with that, and my family, we will stand with that, because we pray a lot about everything, and we pray for the world. George Floyd, I would do my best to cement his legacy, because the land that we live on here has blood all on it. And I stand with the world when I say that. So thank you all for giving me this opportunity to speak. But George Floyd, I had a May 22nd. We supposed to have a march, but it flooded out in Houston, Texas. So it's another march in Minnesota, but the march that we had in his hometown, where we marched to the neighborhood and to Jack Case High School, where we all went to school at, we can't have that particular march, but we will have it June 5th. We postponed it to June 5th. And if anybody would like to come, I would like, you all to let me know ahead of time, and it'll be great. And also, you can see Justice for George. We will continue to fight for accountability for everybody who hasn't had it. We want to go back and open up all cases. And I'm willing to work with officials to get that solved. And Justice for George, and you can see PACFIS, that's the only reason that I started this institution, PACFIS, Philonise and Keita Floyd Institution for Social Change, returning our pain into purpose. And as you can see, here it is, PACFIS, that's the acronyms. I thank you all so much. This has been a blessing to speak to you all, and I'm so sorry for the time frame. Thank you all so much.
Oh, Philonise, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate having you here and hearing your thoughts about how your brother's murder has affected your family and just about this this issue overall. And you know what you said about turning your pain into purpose. That's so beautiful and powerful. Thank you for being here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
All right, so now we move to selected findings and recommendations from the report. I imagine that you've seen the report, which is available on our website at www.inquirycommission.org. It's a massive report. If we attempted to read all of the findings and recommendations at this press conference, we'd be here for a long time. So instead, two of our commissioners will present selected findings and recommendations. First is Commissioner Hina Jilani from Pakistan. She's the president of the World Organization Against Torture and a member of the Nelson Mandela founded group of leaders, the Elders. Commissioner Jilani.
Thank you. Thank you, Kerry. Let me start by reminding everyone that the US played a critical role in the drafting and adoption of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and has ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, and the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. And I remind you of this because I'm going to read out some of the conclusions that we as commissioners of the International Commission of Inquiry came to with regard to gross violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms, as well as international human rights law. So I think it was good to remind everybody what are the international principles that apply to a particular country, whereby not only their domestic legislation, but also every kind of practice and policy that they adopt has to conform to their international obligations. Now, the ones that I named, in particular, these international human rights instruments, are three of the most important human rights treaties that protect the human rights and fundamental freedoms of Black people in the United States in the context of policing. The provisions of treaties the US has ratified are part of US law and are binding on all US states under the supremacy clause of the US Constitution. The protection of the rights enshrined in these treaties are applied to law enforcement officials and are primarily codified in the Code of Conduct for Law Enforcement Officials and the United Nations Basic Principles on the Use of Force and Firearms by the law enforcement officials. The Commission has found that US laws and policy and police practices do not comply with the international standards on the use of force, and this non-compliance has resulted in serious and repeated violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms of the African American population in the US. The facts of the 44 cases examined by the Commission of African American people who were killed or maimed by the police revealed the structural racism embedded in the US legal and policing systems. Many of the serious violations recorded by the Commission resulted from the failure of law enforcement officials to fulfill their duties under the Code of Conduct, such as denial of and failure to secure medical attention for people in their custody, and in some cases, actively preventing medical treatment from being administered. All of the cases heard by the commissioners in which Black people were killed exhibited the arbitrary deprivation of the right to life and exposed failures of the police to adopt practices in compliance with the UN basic principles for the use of force by law enforcement. These arbitrary killings were unjust, unpredictable, done without due process of law, and in violation of the requirements of legality, necessity, and proportionality. The commissioners found unwarranted use of deadly force in all cases it examined, whether in the context of stop and frisk, traffic stops, alleged drug raids, or other types of encounters. We could see a clear pattern that evinced a disregard for Black life that also has implications for the principle of non-discrimination. The commissioners found that the police routinely subject Black people to arbitrary arrest or detention and to bodily harm during arrest and in detention in violation of their Fourth Amendment rights and contrary to the provisions of international law. The incidences of racially biased and disproportionate traffic and investigatory stops, as well as other forms of order maintenance, in particular, make visible the racial targeting of people of African descent for arbitrary arrest or detention. It became clear to us in the course of this inquiry that the principles of fair trial and presumption of innocence are seldom respected by the police in dealing with African American persons or communities. Unfortunately, in some cases, these principles are also not sufficiently protected under US domestic laws. The commissioners found a pattern of race-based discrimination against people of African descent in the US, demonstrated not only by the disproportionate number of killings of Black people, but also in the racial profiling, pretextual traffic stops, order maintenance policing, and police violence against people of African descent. We see this as a systematic and widespread violation of fundamental principles of international human rights law. We were in particular disturbed to note violations of the right to non-discrimination for the killings of Black people with mental illness and against CIS and transgender Black women, girls, and femmes in violation of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The commissioners found violations of the international prohibition against torture and cruel, inhuman, and derogatory treatment in practices adopted by the police during the arrest of Black people. It is also amply clear that the United States has failed in its duty to investigate and ensure effective remedies when violations have occurred. There is a clear pattern of the state's failure to fulfill its duty to protect, manifest in its failure to ensure investigations that are independent, competent, thorough, and effective, and the failure to ensure that perpetrators are held accountable. We also noted the lack of independent and impartial review of police killings, including the absence of judicial review of the virtually unlimited discretion of prosecutors. The commissioners find the police defense of qualified immunity amounts to condoning police violence against persons of African descent and creates a culture of impunity whereby offenders are not held accountable and families are left without redress. We have also found alarming evidence of obstruction of justice and collusion between various arms of law enforcement, prosecutors, coroners, and even medical examiners in connection with cases of the unjustified killings of persons of African descent. The commissioners have also found a troubling pattern of creating false narratives and smear campaigns directed at victims and their families. These are some of the conclusions that I found noteworthy to give to the media. But please, I assure you that the real impact of the report comes by reading it. And as I have said earlier, I have been part of many critical investigations of gross human rights violations around the world. And this has been one of the most compelling were the most compelling hearings that I have heard, and of course, personally, very distressing to hear. But at the same time, I respect the willingness of the victims and their families to come forward and give us a clear picture so that we can let the world know where injustice is happening, where access to justice has to be given now, and where the pressure of global public opinion should be put. in order to remedy the wrongs that are being done and to prevent further wrongs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Jilani, for your presentation of the selected findings and also your thoughtful analysis of those findings. Thank you. Our next presentation will be from Commissioner Judge Peter Herbert from the United Kingdom. Peter?
Hello, hi. Hi. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Right. Thank you very much for the introduction, and to Professor Lennox Hinds, Dr. Willy Mutunga, yourself, and all the other rapporteurs and commissioners for their excellent work. I was humbled to be part of this commission, and I will split my comments into three parts: some generic comments, which I think may be helpful, some comments on the recommendations addressed to the Office of the High Commissioner, and then the issues which relate to the seeking of reparations in the context of slavery and the colonial struggle generally. Just by way of introduction, my family is originally from Georgia, although transited through Nova Scotia, through London to Sierra Leone and back to London, and now in Nairobi, Kenya. Throughout my experience, the brutalization of people of African descent is nothing new. None of the report came as a surprise to me or people like me. And I think one of the things that is the hallmark of human rights abuses of African people has a link through slavery, through colonialism, and almost every encounter we have with white society and power and aggressive societies mean we end up either brutalized or killed. And I wanted to turn this somehow into a constructive issue, not just on the law, but to the George Floyd family, in particular to Philemon, his brother, who we just heard about. I would like to extend an invitation to visit Nairobi, to visit Tanzania and Uganda towards the end of this year or early next year, to make that direct link with the suffering of African people in the United States and the continued suffering and human rights abuses which occur on the continent in relation to police extrajudicial killings and brutality. That, I think, will help square the circle and make our discussions and submissions relevant, directly relevant, as they must be, both to the African Union and to the United Nations Special Rapporteur. That having been said, what the Commission found was that the level of police violence against people of African descent constituted a gross violation of human rights. That has a
Hi, Peter, we can't hear you.
Sorry.
Okay, now we can.
Oh, sorry. So I must have lost the signal. So that has a direct link to the lynchings of the southern states, the antebellum period in the United States, and the subjugation of minorities, in particular of indigenous and African people. And it was done with a purpose. And my personal belief, and that of many commissioners, is that this is done to subjugate. It is not just the immediate murder that is the crime, but it is to penalize and subjugate the whole of African society in the United States, and to send out a clear message: you are not, and you will never have been, fully human. We will be the people in control. You will not have the privilege of life that we as white people have. And so for me, there's a very deep message which resonates with the writings of Frantz Fanon and many, many others. We found that and recommended that the Human Rights Council send a full commission of inquiry to the United States. Also that the council mandate the appointment of a special rapporteur on systemic police racial violence and extrajudicial killings in the United States. And that there must be monitoring, absolutely fundamental. There must be monitoring of this racist police violence, and it cannot escape under the international attention which the Americans love to give to the Uyghur community in in China. They love to spotlight injustices in Sudan or anywhere else. But when it's close to home, there is a myopia that descends upon the American media, unless it is full frontal and demonstrated by progressive white people and people of African descent all over the world, which this was. We would like also recommended that the High Commissioner's comprehensive report be mandated by the Human Rights Council Resolution 43/1 and include the recommendations of this inquiry. And the primary concern was the demilitarization of law enforcement throughout the United States. And as an outsider, somebody who comes from essentially the United Kingdom and Europe, I mean, the police in Norway have killed one person in the last 12 years. And there is a direct link between the Americans' love of weapons generally and their Second Amendment rights, which were designed for single loading rifles and muskets and not designed for weapons of mass destruction and the militarization of the police, which has resulted. The second part of what I'd like to say relates to the issue of reparations. And the commissioners found, and the rapporteurs were very skillfully wove into their excellent report, the fact that the call for international justice cannot be separated from the need for reparations for African Americans as a whole. 40 acres and a mule never happened at the end of slavery, but there is legislation. In fact, the Commission to Study Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act, which ought to be passed, and that would allow or pave the way for reparations to be studied, analyzed, and promoted from 1619 to the present. Because in a sense, without land, you have no power. And the attack upon African American communities in Florida, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and many other places where in a sense, the Black Renaissance was killed economically and led to the impoverishment and redlining of African American communities. That is central to these findings. If you're poor, you're more likely to be killed. If you're homeless, you're likely to be killed. If you're mentally ill, you're likely to be murdered by the police. And all of these situations are driven by the fundamental lack of justice and equality that lies at the heart of the African American reality today. We also made recommendations, finally, to the United States to ratify and implement international human rights norms. There has been although my fellow commissioner spoke of some of the treaties that the US has ratified, it has specifically refused to ratify some of the most pressing ones, and it does not enforce the Convention Against the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and the Convention Against Torture. It is one thing to ratify a treaty, it is another thing to enforce it. And we found that it is the lack of enforcement in many cases which pits the United States against the civil society and democratic societies where they actually practice more of what they preach. And finally, some very general points, but I hope not out of turn, is that this has led to an awakening of the power of the Pan-African movement. And for me, one of the things that can come out of this appalling tragedy and the 44 other cases and many others that we saw is the reawakening of the fact that if you look back in our history, the Pan-African Congress of Manchester in 1945, the Pan-African Congress in London, and the work of the African National Congress was transposed with the hard work of African Americans, of people on the continent and in Europe working together and in harmony, and progressive white people from around the world. And that is something which for me is fundamental to the work of this commission. And therefore what we have to do is not allow this to rest on a library shelf, but breathe life into this text so that we not only save lives in the United States, but whether it's Canada or in France, where there's a right-wing backlash against filming police extrajudicial killings, we have to make sure that our lives are valuable, whether they be in the SARS protests in Nigeria, or on the streets of Nairobi, or on the streets of South Africa. Every single life, whatever the color, race, creed, or religion, is of value. And while I say this, I pay some recognition to what is happening to Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza at the time. Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And therefore I commend this report to the wider communities, and thank you once again for the honor of, and with all humility of taking part. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Herbert, and for your presentation and your thoughtful analysis. Okay, at this point, I will open the conversation up to see if there are any questions from any journalists present. Okay, and if you're a journalist and you have a question, you can raise your hand or type it into the chat. Okay, so perhaps there are no questions. I do want to note that the Kenya Broadcasting Company has graciously been broadcasting this press conference live, so it's reaching many people, and we're very thankful for that. All right, so we will probably wrap up a little bit sooner than we thought, but are there any comments from the commissioners, our rapporteur, Professor Horace Campbell, or Lennox Hinds, before we sign off?
Horace,
I would like to thank all of the participants for your timely and thoughtful analysis and presentations. And I thank you on behalf of the steering committee.
I thank everybody from the steering committee, the rapporteurs, my fellow commissioners for doing the work, which was absolutely needed. And even my own eyes were opened during the course of this investigation, I tell you. And I thank Willy and Horace and Peter for being with us today. Peter, thank you especially for mentioning the situation in the Middle East right now.
I want to second that. I would really like to second it. We could not have had this press conference today without mentioning the crimes that are being carried out against our brothers and sisters in Palestine. And so, Peter, I really would like to second what our sister has said about your presentation of the recommendations. Only yesterday, the media brought out information on the killing of Ronald Green in Louisiana. So 2 years ago, Ronald Green was brutally killed in Louisiana, and the matter of his death has been brought forward by his family. And so many, just like Philonise is with us today, and is bringing forward the matters of how the families are turning their grief into mobilization. We've seen this with families one after another. So I want to thank Brother Willy Mutunga for coordinating the media and our brothers and sisters. I do hope that some of them are still with us. And Brother Mutunga, we look forward to your leadership in bringing this matter to West Africa and before the African Union. And I welcome the proposition by Peter Herbert that selected members of the families will be invited to East Africa so that the question of police violence will be internationalized, and that this Commission of Inquiry becomes a living document in the hands of those who are fighting for decency in all parts of the world.
I also second that recommendation from Peter. I think it is a way in which we further internationalize the issue of systemic police violence of people of African descent in the United States and demonstrate the solidarity and commonality of our suffering.
Can I just very quickly? Can I just very quickly say that I owe a debt to Mau Semina and Dr. Willy Mutunga, who introduced me to a professor in the United States of Kenyan origin, and he reminded me that in fact one of the leading academics, Pierre Gama Pinto and Malcolm X, met in the Bandung Conference in Indonesia and made common cause, both against police violence and against the post-colonial struggle. So in a sense, my idea is not new. It comes out of that historical context. And I will be delighted to work with you and Dr. Willy Mutunga and others to bring that forward.
Excellent. Excellent.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Horace and Peter. Okay, so if there are, let me just double check, there are no other comments. Thank you everyone for joining this press conference. You've heard from Philonise Floyd, whose brother George was a victim of racist police violence. You've heard from respected African jurist Willy Mutunga, who endorses our report and is in fact helping us to mobilize Africa. You've heard from our two commissioners are present, Commissioner Hina Jilani, Commissioner Peter Herbert. You've heard from our rapporteur, Horace Campbell. We ask the media in East Africa to share this information widely and to share our call for solidarity. Please be in touch if you need additional information or would like to conduct interviews. Asante sana. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.